When the National Airspace System planned for facilities and equipment and whatever development was that was released by the FAA, the agency was facing a problem of potentially crisis proportions. In that, meeting increasing airspace system demand with dated and deteriorating facilities, and at that time, the FAA had programs already in place, ongoing modernization projects in various stages of planning and development. However, it was not until the formulation of this plan that the true scope and the urgency of the NAS situation was placed in perspective with both public, Congress, airspace users, and basically the nation as a whole. The release of the plan was overdue to the extent that airspace system facilities were already being stressed toward capacity, demand labor-intensive efforts to sustain aging equipment, and as a consequence, the FAA is faced with massive design development and replacement and upgrade activities which are aggravated by the urgency of completion and obviously an intolerance of error or compromise to safety. What's interesting about this was the opening paragraph, admittedly edited a little bit since you don't know that it was from 1984. This is the audit of the FAA's NAS plan by the newly selected single systems integrator for the FAA, Mark Marietta. And that is something we need to talk about. Welcome back, and it is amazing we are having the exact same conversation that the country had in 1984 about redoing the NAS. But before we get to a brand new ATC system, we have something to celebrate. Newark is fixed. Yeehaw! Pop the champagne. The Secretary of Transportation announced that the FAA successfully transitioned to a brand new fiber optic communication system between New York and Philadelphia, which should solve the problems causing the radar and communications outages at Newark. Hey, that's good news. And the FAA is doing more, including increased staffing, in which they have a solid pipeline already, and making the airspace move to from New York to Philadelphia more permanent by establishing it actually in the star system there. And although that should have been done in the first place, it will be done by, unfortunately, the end of the summer travel season. So just in time so that we can replace it with a brand new ATC system. So let's get into that. All right, we're having the same conversation from 40 years ago and following the same template. Hey, it kind of worked before. A lot of stops and starts, a lot of messy programs, but in the end, if you look at the air traffic control system of today, with ERAM and STARS, they are outgrowths of everything that happened from that original NAS plan. It took a long time, close to 20 to 40 years to get it, kind of done, but that's how consolidation got done, new automation systems were done, new radars were done, and so it's not a bad thing to follow that template, and it was critical that Mark Marietta was involved with the architecture of all that, so not a bad plan for what the FAA is doing now. The FAA is starting to implement a brand new comprehensive world-class ATC system, and just like in the 80s, the Secretary of Transportation and the President recognized that the FAA will need an industry's partner to accomplish that mission. So the FAA recently released a request for solution for the brand new air traffic control system, a modernization effort. Hey, it's kind of worked before, right? So why not follow that path? The FAA is asking for a comprehensive reinvention of the systems, services, and platforms that enable the NAS operations. Wow, that is a mouthful. Reinvent the NAS in 3 years and 3 months. And yes, that's the goal, with the base period of being exactly 3 years and 3 months. The integrator will be responsible for executing all necessary efforts to modernize NAS infrastructure and capabilities. That includes upgrading facilities, acquiring and deploying new technologies, managing integration across the diverse set of, 70,000 different pieces of equipment, and coordinating with all stakeholders and deconflict parallel efforts across the NAS, and all work must not compromise safety. That's a huge undertaking. An absolutely overwhelming objective regardless of the timeline. So put that deadline at 1,000 days out, and what universe is that even possible? Call in Doctor Who because we're going to need the TARDIS to kind of reset the timeline here. I do think that you can make a big dent towards that objective, especially when you can get a first tranche of $12 billion right up front. Super important to get things started. Okay, I got to delve into my 2 cents on the request for a solution. The objective is fine and consistent with public events and statements by the President and the Secretary, and certainly I think we all have a need that we need to do something on the heels of the tragedy at Washington National. So that's no surprise. But in the RFS, you can see the parochialism scream out at you from the FAA organizations. And parochialism is the death of a large systems integrator. Do you want to check out the RAND report on future combat systems, which identified why Boeing couldn't finish the job? It's a good read. The FAA has to have the final word. They are accountable. No issues with that. But they are micromanaging, needing to approve things like every single subcontractor that is employed by the integrator. Really? Any company worthy of being the integrator with a robust, resilient, conflict-free, and stable supply chain, it's already established for them. They have trusted suppliers, people they can hold accountable to make things happen. Disrupting that in any way harms the very foundation of why the FAA is hiring an integrator in the first place. It is this cut and paste from small business task order work at small jobs that shows that the internal processes of the FAA are not aligned or prepared to achieve the ultimate objective. No way. So these are confusing messages, and what does that translate to? Well, I would have liked to have seen a large defense tier 1 company rise to the occasion, someone with integration skills, the ability to ramp up to a war effort to achieve the mission. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think the FAA will be left with companies that lack true integration quals or are desperate to hold on to their work that they already have at the FAA, or a company has more passion than qualifications, and they will just try to figure out how to navigate through it all. And I have to say, if you have passion, that could be really good. I mean, that may be good enough to get started. So that would be, my direction. Now, certainly we're watching the sausage being made here, and I don't like some of the ingredients, but I still want, and we need to have that sausage completed, because I do like the idea of a single partner for the FAA to get things done quickly. So hopefully in the end, it'll all be a pretty good tasting sausage. Let me know what you think in the comments below about the RFS or other issues that on the approach. I'd like to read your comments. So it's pretty obvious that much of the new world-class ATC system will have to come from European providers. They have the most advanced off-the-shelf stuff for air traffic control. The U.S. is big and it has lots of stuff, but the U.S. hasn't bought anything new in a very, very long time. And the rest of the world has moved to COTS, commercial off-the-shelf stuff. And so vendors, particularly European vendors, are pursuing constant transformation of those systems to continue to sell to countries around the world. It is an excellent marketplace, and the European providers are dominant. Now, I expect we implement our own ATC systems, and everything in the end will have a USA logo, but the core will have to start from somewhere else, primarily Europe. And once we get that new US ATC system, our US suppliers will be in competition with Europe. And that's where it gets interesting. The main message released at this year's Paris show by the European Aviation Research and Strategy Plan, which is Europe's counterpart to the US Aviation Research Plan, calls for investment of 66 billion euros between 2028 and 2034. Now, to put it in perspective, that's more than we think it'll cost to replace our entire NAS. It's also comparable to the FAA's research budget, which is under $200 million a year. I mean, a pittance for comparison. This investment in both research and innovation is to safeguard Europe's sovereignty and competitiveness and resilience. So once we get our new ATC system, we need to keep this European sovereignty notion in mind to make sure that the US has its own industrial base plan so that we continually have a world-class ATC system and not be subject to just follow whatever Europe's doing. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to smash that like button, hit subscribe and the notification bell, and we'll see you next time. We got a few things to talk about. We're having, oh shit, I can't do that. There, just leave that there. And how do we?